Mindy, please.
Committee member Hodges.
Present.
Okay, committee member Hodges.
Present.
Blackerby.
Present.
France.
Present.
Horn.
Present.
Sanford.
Present.
And Chair Rodriguez.
Present.
Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everybody. Do we have any changes to the agenda?
No, Madam Chair.
Is there any public comment on anything that's not on the agenda? Okay. If not, then we'll move to the approval of the minutes from the November 29th meeting.
Move approval.
All in favor?
Aye.
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 Okay, those are approved. And now let's move to the waterfront report, our quarterly MTD waterfront report. Any comments from anyone about this report?
Well, before you ask your members, Madam Chair, I just wanted to let you know that this is going to be on the April agenda of the Downtown Parking Committee. It was one of the requests of this committee that they also see that, and that's going to be happening in the April meeting, which is the second Thursday at 7:30 in the same room.
And they will get the downtown waterfront shuttle report. Is that what you're saying? Okay.
Chair Rodriguez,
Yes.
if I could comment from the Downtown Parking Committee, it was a pleasure to see as part of the Funk Zone parking study, the proposed, really only looping around one additional block, but I think it makes a big difference, potential, so downtown shuttle routing through the Funk Zone. And I really want to appreciate MTD for being part of that conversation, willing to think a little differently about that route as the downtown sort of evolves.
Any other comments? We appreciate the report being quarterly, condensed. It's easier to review that way, so thank you very much. All right, let's move on to the Vision Zero strategy concerning the Cabrillo Bike Lanes Safety Restriping Project.
Madam Chair, thank you, and committee members. If you remember, as you recall, we've brought two Vision Zero projects to your attention recently. One was the Las Positas restriping safety project, and then the other one was the Cabrillo restriping safety project. And based on your recommendation and finding those consistent with the City Council's Vision Zero strategy, we took those both to Council. And the Council moved forward on the Las Positas restriping, and we're in the works of doing the engineering of that to get that to the repaver to do that. On the Cabrillo Boulevard Safety Project, the Council felt like it was better to have more public engagement. Originally, staff had done a meeting on the beach and got engaged with the volleyball players, and some of the East Beach Association members came to that, and we had a subsequent meeting with them. And it was really important to the Council that we expand the noticing and awareness of what the Council is trying to accomplish on Cabrillo with that corridor being in the Vision Zero priority corridor. So we had a listening workshop that was last week, and we had a very good turnout. It was during the storms, the lightning storm, if you remember the day. And actually some of our members attended, so it'll be interesting to hear their perspectives on how that went. And we went through a number of options besides the one that we presented to you. It really started with 6 options. We narrowed it down to 4 to make it really simple. And so what we're going to do tonight is Derek Bailey, our traffic engineer, is going to walk us through that. We're going to describe to you a little bit, which is in your report, about what we heard, about some of the feedback that we heard from that workshop that is our traditional listening workshop around tables So it's a very high touch. Everyone gets to comment and participate in that workshop. And then, so just to start with the end in mind, what we're here to do is go ahead and present those options to you. And then specifically of the 4 alternatives that Derek is going to present to you, we're asking you to find 2 of those alternatives, 2 and 3, consistent with the council's Vision Zero strategy. And then we're asking you to recommend either of those to the city council. And then we will be at city council next Tuesday to present your recommendation to them. So if there's any questions on the process, if there's not any questions, I'll just have Derek Bailey continue and describe those options for us and how we went through that process.
Good evening, committee members. As Rob said, my name is Derek Bailey. I'm with the city's traffic engineering group. This presentation that I'm going to give this evening, a lot of familiar faces in the room from our public meeting last Tuesday. It's a very similar presentation. So many people have already seen it, but for the benefit of those watching at home and people that couldn't attend, I'll go over everything again. The reason for this project now is there's a pavement maintenance project that's going to happen later in the spring. And the limits of that pavement maintenance project on Cabrillo Boulevard are from the end of the bird refuge all the way to Garden Street. And when that happens, when we do a pavement maintenance project, especially on a Vision Zero corridor, and a Vision Zero corridor is a corridor that we've identified as having much higher rate and frequency of serious and fatal collisions. When we do a paving project on a Vision Zero corridor, it's an opportunity to look at it, examine it, and ask ourselves if there's anything that we can do to reduce that collision pattern and make that road safer. And so we did that. Most of Cabrillo Boulevard, between Garden Street and Niños, we did not find any patterns of collisions. But immediately east of Niños, adjacent to the bird refuge, we did see some collision patterns. This diagram here illustrates the types of crashes that happened in the 5-year period between 2013 and 2017. So over that 5-year period, there were 3 collisions that involved U-turning vehicles from the parking aisle, making a U-turn so they could go west on Cabrillo. There was 1 reported collision involving a cyclist. There were 8 collisions that involved eastbound vehicles crashing into the wall at the beginning of the S-turn. And there were also 4 crashes westbound into the guardrail. So once we've identified the types of collisions that are happening along this particular stretch of roadway, we start looking at what are the types of things that we can do to prevent those collisions from happening again. And each different type of collision has a different potential treatment. That's okay. For the collisions in the S-turn, those collisions by and large are speed related. So the collisions are happening largely because of unsafe speed. So the things that we can do to prevent those collisions from happening is we can improve the visibility of the upcoming curve. So as a driver is driving east on Cabrillo, approaching the curve, what we've done already is we've beefed up the warning signs that go around that corner. They're highly reflective. They really jump out at you at nighttime. So that's been done. And the other thing we can do is to control speed by introducing more side friction. So when I say that the collisions are speed related, if we can reduce the operating speeds out there, we'll also reduce the frequency of the collisions that are happening and the severity. So when I talk about side friction, that's really the sensation that drivers feel as they're driving down a street. And the more wide open a street feels, and the more straight it is, and the more flat it is, the more likely drivers are to go fast. They feel comfortable going fast. And if we change the characteristics of the road to introduce more side friction, make the road feel more constrained, if the lane widths can be narrowed, things like that, just to make the road feel less wide open. That introduces what we call side friction, and drivers will feel less comfortable going fast. So if we can introduce side friction on this corridor, we're likely to control speed and likely to reduce the frequency of collisions in the S-turn. The U-turn collisions, there's several possible mitigations. One is we can provide drivers with better sight lines, and we'll talk more about that in a second. We can prevent U-turns from happening altogether. The challenge with that is that there is a demand. People are making U-turns because they want to go west on Cabrillo back into town. So if we don't provide for the U-turns along this corridor, they are going to make those turns somewhere. And can that be done safely? And the other thing we can do is move conflicts further away from the parking aisle. And this diagram here illustrates what I mean by that. This is the current configuration on Cabrillo. So there's 2 lanes going eastbound, 2 lanes going westbound, and then along the beach side of Cabrillo is the parking aisle. When somebody makes a U-turn from that parking aisle so then they can go west, just picture somebody driving down that number 2 lane eastbound right next to those parked cars. That conflict point is where those 2 vehicle paths cross one another. And for a person that is making that U-turn, they're either looking in their side mirror or they're having to look over their shoulder. They probably don't have very good visibility. And the amount of reaction time that those 2 vehicles have to one another as to when that vehicle starts pulling into that traffic lane isn't very much. So that conflict can happen bang, bang without much reaction time. So one strategy is to improve that. And I'll talk more about that later. Bike-involved collisions, those can be mitigated by providing bike lanes. And on top of that, buffers provide a separation between moving traffic and cyclists in the bike lanes. And it's important to note that, consistent with our Vision Zero policy and strategy, we can reduce the severity of collisions by reducing the vehicle speeds. So a cyclist or a pedestrian is much more likely to walk away from a crash with a vehicle if the operating speeds are lower. We presented 4 alternatives at the workshop last Tuesday. One alternative is the previously adopted bicycle master plan configuration, 2 eastbound lanes, 1 westbound lane with bike lanes. There's the back-in angle parking option with an all-way stop. This is what was presented to the City Council. That's 1 eastbound lane and 1 westbound lane, and mostly continuous angle parking along East Beach. There's a modified version of that where there's a combination of back-in angle parking and parallel parking that would retain the traffic signal, and as well a center median option where there'd be 1 eastbound lane, 1 westbound lane, but that would retain parallel parking. There would be no angle parking with that configuration. So the previously adopted bicycle master plan configuration, the plan is to eliminate 1 westbound lane coming from the Los Patos intersection at the eastern end of the bird refuge. And with the extra space gained from eliminating that single lane, there'd be enough room for bicycle lanes. As far as safety potential, or the potential to reduce collisions with this configuration, overall it's low. There will be bike lanes that will be a safety benefit to cyclists. However, the operating speeds aren't likely to change. We still have 2 eastbound lanes. The feel for eastbound traffic is going to be very similar to what it is today. We still have parallel parking. There's going to be U-turn conflicts. So while it's an improvement over today's conditions, the overall potential compared to the other alternatives is low. This is just a overall view of the corridor. Kind of hard to see from this angle, but nothing more to point out than we already showed. This is option number 2, the back-in angle parking. So there'd be 1 lane in each direction, back-in angle parking and bike lanes. And the roadway width varies slightly along Cabrillo. So in certain parts, there'd be enough room for some buffers between bike lanes and moving traffic lanes. This blacked out space right here, that's just meant to illustrate that there will be accessible parking provided as part of the overall parking plan. And so with what that black space illustrates is just there'd be a van accessible aisle, and parking spaces reserved for the disabled on either side of that. How does parallel or reverse angle parking work? It's a lot like parallel parking, -1 maneuver. So a driver would just pull forward ahead of the parking space and back in. Some of the benefits with reverse angle parking. There's greater driver visibility. I've got a photograph that I'll show you coming right up that illustrates that. Better bicycle and pedestrian safety because of that visibility. Better loading and unloading for beach access. Vehicle trunks and hatches point back towards the beach, so if anybody is hauling their stuff, it's at the back of the vehicle and easily accessible. And the parking supply at East Beach would be increased between 30 and 40 spaces. We think about 36 spaces likely, including new ADA spaces. Important to note that we talked about at the last meeting with you that the chain link fence would be removed, and in its place would be a curb made likely of railroad ties. And that'll allow for vehicles to back up and have unimpeded access into the park. This is that photograph that I was alluding to. This is a photograph from Vancouver, Washington. And this fellow here in the silver car is pulling out from around this SUV. And you can see the sight lines between the cyclist and the driver are really good. So drivers pulling out of their parking spaces have much better sight lines than they do compared to parallel parking. This is the overall configuration from one side to the other. It's important to note that this configuration, as shown, converts the traffic signal at Cabrillo and Niños to an all-way stop. And that's important because immediately east of the intersection, we're going to be merging 2 lanes into one. And at the end of that merge is the beginning of the back-in angle parking spaces. So it's really important that drivers are going slower through that area, and one way to accomplish that would be with converting that traffic control from traffic signal to an all-way stop. Just regarding the all-way stop conversion, as I mentioned, it's a safer transition merging 2 eastbound lanes into one, and the overall delay is comparable between an all-way stop under lower volume conditions and a traffic signal. So under lower volume conditions, the always stop actually performs better. Under a little bit higher volume conditions, during the busiest hours of the day, traffic signal is a little bit better. But the busiest hours of the busiest days don't happen very often. This is a graph showing some of the daily traffic volumes from last summer. The most frequent daily traffic volume is between 7,500 and 8,000, but the vast majority of the time, even other days, it's below 10,000. We did some daily traffic counts, turning movement counts, the weekend of February 21st to 23rd. The Thursday, 7,800, Friday, 8,300, and the Saturday, 7,300. And even on the President's Day weekend, when it was really busy getting out of town, the daily volume was about 9,300. So that day it was very congested, people trying to get out of town. Traffic was backed up through the S-turns. And even on that day, the daily traffic volume was 9,300. And under those volumes, an all-way stop will perform very well. The pedestrian volumes, the Thursday was quite windy out, so that may have affected how many people were heading to the beach. But Friday and Saturday, you can see there's a lot of pedestrian activity at that intersection. Just to compare the traffic volumes to other streets in the city, San Andreas, East Anapamu, which has multiple all-way stops along it, and Modoc Road are all in the 8,000 range. Some higher volume streets, over 11,000, Upper De La Vina and Meigs. Over 11,000 is likely what we'll see on the very busiest summer days. So they'll even... Option number 3, and this is a difference from the back-in angle parking option that we just showed you. This retains the traffic signal at Niños. And the first back-in angle parking space is moved to the end of the residential complex. We chose this place for beginning the back-in angle parking as a way to address some of the concerns that we heard from residents that it's really not going to look very good with a lot of the people that have windows that face out towards Cabrillo. So the total number of parking spaces provided in this configuration is 78. The reason we can retain the traffic signal is that first parking space is quite away from the intersection, so we're not looking at that merge and then that first parking space all happening in a short space. We did hear some really great comments at the public meeting last week. One idea was to not start the parking until even further down East Beach. That would result in fewer parking spaces and likely wouldn't control speed as well, but it is an alternative to consider. We also heard comments that, well, maybe we should keep the traffic signal, but the first back-in angle parking space should be moved further west. So conversely, that would add more parking, but would likely have similar speed control qualities. In terms of what would a U-turning vehicle look like from the hybrid alternative, and I'm just going to go back a slide. So it's the western part of the corridor there would still have parallel parking. But even under that, the U-turns are going to be much safer. The travel lane gets moved further away from the beach, and you can see that U-turning vehicle, that first conflict point isn't about till it's good 30 or 40 feet into their maneuver. So it's a lot more reaction time for drivers and to see one another. And the fourth alternative that was discussed at the meeting last week is a center median alternative. So that would retain parallel parking. There'd be no angle parking, and there'd be a raised center median in order to prevent U-turns from happening. This is an overview of the configuration. So if U-turns can't happen and there's a demand for people to make U-turns, what they're likely going to do is to make a U-turn when they get down to the Clark Estate driveway. So our idea is to create a little area that they could swing off to the side, a little jug handle we call it, and that way they could turn, square up, and have a good view in both directions. The concern with that is that we're potentially concentrating a lot of movements into one location, and there could be some unintended safety effects that happen with that. So overall, it's probably better to provide good sight lines from where they're trying to make the maneuver, as opposed to concentrating all the maneuvers in one location. Overall, we think this is probably about a medium in terms of collision reduction potential. Just the collision reduction potential of all four on one screen. As I mentioned, the previously adopted bicycle master plan. The collision reduction potential, while it's better than it is today, overall it's probably low compared to the other alternatives. Numbers 2 and 3, we think there's really great safety benefits with both of them. So they'd be high potential to reduce collisions. And the center median alternative would be a median. And just some other things to consider with the center median. There's emergency responders. That's a big consideration. With the center median, if you think of emergency responders, a fire truck coming down the street, people hear the the sirens and look in their mirrors and they see the lights going, people generally pull off to the side, and that provides a nice path of travel down the middle of the road for fire trucks or police or ambulance to get through. With a median, there's a lot less room for maneuverability. So center medians really aren't emergency responder friendly. So that's a consideration. Cost is a consideration. It's likely hundreds of thousands of dollars for that median, and it would delay the project because it's not something that we could get designed and implemented this spring. So those are considerations as well. Our recommendation to the committee. We recommend that the City Council find options 2 and 3 of the project are consistent with the Vision Zero strategy, meaning that they have a high potential to reduce collisions, and also recommend to the City Council a preferred project option for implementation. And with that, I'd be happy to answer any questions.
And before Derek does, actually, if you could go back to the last slide, Derek, I just want to highlight for you what we received, the community input we received, and this is from your report, but some people may not have the reports in their hands who may be at home. So I'm just going to go through it really quickly. And then if there's any dots you want to connect with the public comments that you heard and questions you have for Derek, I think that would be very appropriate. Generally speaking, the people who showed up at the workshop did not favor options 1 and 4. And options 2 and 3 were overall favored by the people who were there. For the previously adopted master plan option, many felt that the 2 lanes would not effectively reduce speeds in the corridor. And for all the back-end angled options, some residents were apprehensive about people learning to back in on reverse angled parking, learning the technique, while others voiced concerns about the combination of one eastbound lane with the back-end angled parking would result in worse traffic and increased delay or potential collisions. The addition of parking spaces offered by option 2 were generally appreciated, though some residents mentioned that the additional angle parking would look too dense, and they preferred option 3 or the existing parallel parking. Participants were split about 50-50 about which about the always stop sign versus the signal at Niños and Cabrillo. There was also general support for removing the chain link fence and increased access that it would create. Through some expressed concern that the lack of a physical barrier could allow children to enter the street from the park. Option 3, back-end angle parking shifted east, was a popular option for those who preferred a signal at the intersection at Niños and Cabrillo. This option also gained support by allowing increased parking options, ADA accessible spaces, and the lessened visual aspect achieved by shifting the angle parking further to the east. Some attendees liked the center media option and the ability to effectively eliminate U-turns altogether on Cabrillo, though this option did not garner a lot of support. Some mentioned that they liked the one component of that project, which was the turnaround created at the Clark Estate driveway. And then generally other options that aren't included in some of the themes that we heard was that some expressed concern in shifting the back-end angle parking further east to where the split rail fence begins, so further east. Some believe that always stop sign would not be safe for pedestrians crossing the street. There was a desire for a loading zone at the western end of the parking zone close to Sycamore Creek. Some expressed interest in adding a double yellow line and no U-turn signs. Some expressed concerns about existing angled park vehicle headlights confusing westbound drivers. Some mentioned that perhaps the city test back-in parking as a concept somewhere other than Cabrillo Boulevard. Some felt that the median would be unnecessarily expensive and would only slow traffic on Cabrillo Boulevard. I want to thank Sam Fertner, our mobility coordinator. He was the person who synthesized all this and brought it to this report. And I got to tell you, it's a lot of work that he performed, and he did a really, really good job. So now that you've obviously read what I just told you, but some of the comments that the public has might be good opportunities to ask a traffic engineer about. And I thought that would help your discussion. So thank you very much.
I think maybe a few questions of clarification, and then we'll have public comment. So I'll be brief. I picked up on one thing you said I wanted to clarify. Between the two highly favored options, was there some wiggle room? You know, there was did you say there was like a third hybrid even of that? You know, the parking spaces would be all back end or half back end, but then I kind of missed that. There's another little iteration that isn't drawn out.
Chair Rodriguez, thank you. Great question. So I'm showing alternative number 3 up on the screen now, and that red arrow indicates where we showed the back end angle parking ending or beginning, depending which way you're going, at the public meeting last week. Yes, there is flexibility as to where that ending point is. Like I mentioned, we did choose that ending point, trying to get it out of the view of people that live across the street from Cabrillo. But if the goal is to keep the traffic signal and maximize parking, you know, that ending point could be down here somewhere. That would likely add another 10 parking spaces or so. Conversely, if that's not far enough east, that last parking space could be anywhere over near the split rail fence as well. I think the downside with that is it likely wouldn't have the traffic calming characteristics that more parking would have. But it certainly would be an improvement over today's conditions. So that's just something to consider. That's what we showed at the meeting, but there is flexibility if maximizing parking or moving it further east to improve views is important.
Thank you, Mr. Bailey. Anyone else have questions before we have some public comment?
Thank you, Chair Rodriguez. Mr. Bailey, just to reiterate, to try to remember from last time we had this presentation, the difference between the always stop and the signalized intersection, we had this basically like tested for us in the past, when there was damage, right, to the post. What was the feedback from the community at that point when we had that repair, and how long was that for, if you can kind of recall? Like that was a bit of a test case for this. What feedback did we get back?
Community Member France, thank you. Great question. Several years ago, when we were doing routine maintenance and inspections on our traffic signals at Cabrillo and Niños, we found some really significant corrosion on the traffic signal mast arm that hangs over the road, and we were concerned that failure was imminent and it would fall on somebody. So we removed the corroded part of the arm. When we did that, we removed one of the left turn arrows, so the traffic signal couldn't function normally. And so we had to turn it into all red flash, which means always stop, while we waited for a new mast arm to come in from Oklahoma. It took several months to come in, so for several months that traffic signal was flashing red and being treated as an always stop. There were some stop compliance issues during the first few days. So we added warning signs that there was a stop condition ahead. We put stop signs, several of them in the middle of the road, and stop sign compliance generally was pretty good after that. We heard mixed feedback from people, and I think it's really consistent with what we heard last week, is that some people didn't feel as comfortable as they do with the traffic signal. They feel more protected, like drivers have a solid red light and they have to stop. Some people did feel fine, and one of the added benefits that we think is worth considering is the reduction in delay for side street traffic and left turning traffic, and as well pedestrians trying to cross Cabrillo. It can be a long light. You know, it takes a long time to cycle around to all the different movements and serve all the different movements. And with an always stop, generally drivers just pull up, look left, look right, take your turn, go. And it can be a pretty quick sequence of events. Likewise for pedestrians, they pull up, wait for the next car to go, and they can cross the street. So the delayed benefits to us were quite compelling, and we didn't realize that there could possibly be delay benefits by taking out a traffic signal and converting it to an all-way stop until this maintenance issue came up. And during those 2 months that it was an all-red flash, it really opened our eyes that, hey, this thing's actually operating pretty well. There wasn't congestion, and the side street traffic was generally being served a lot better. So, but like I mentioned, as far as resident feelings, it was mixed. Some really appreciated the delay reduction, but there was some apprehension about safety.
Thank you, Chair Rodriguez. And my question is, could you combine the flashing lights like you have on De La Vina and then placed in State Street for pedestrians, that they can signal them themselves, with a stop sign?
Committee Member Hodges, no, we can't. The manual and uniform traffic control devices, which is the federal and state manual that we have to follow, that kind of defines what traffic control devices are and what's compatible with what doesn't allow flashing lights with a stop sign. Flashing lights is a warning device. The lights are yellow, and they're to alert drivers of potential pedestrian. So it's really not it's in conflict with a stop condition. You know, stop means stop. So, unfortunately, no. Yeah, no, it would make sense, just that extra visual cue. The thing that is concerning to traffic engineers is what happens at the next intersection where there's an all-way stop and it doesn't have those features. Do drivers behave differently? Well, the driver pulled up, and if he hits a pedestrian, he said, well, I didn't see any lights flashing. Why don't you have flashing lights here? So building consistency into our roadway network is important, and adding something unique like that might have unintended consequences.
Well, thank you for that answer. And then would you retain a red flashing light or just a stop sign?
Just stop signs. Interestingly, from a few residents from El Escorial, the complex to the north, they supported removal of the traffic signal for different reasons. They don't like the lights shining up towards their balconies and their windows. So having the lights completely removed would improve their views. So different reason, but no. In general, we don't use flashing red lights here in town unless there's a really a stop sign compliance issue. The only place we had it in town was at Cliff and Las Positas before the roundabout was put in, and that was just because drivers were coming down Las Positas or coming down Cliff Drive so fast that they weren't recognizing that there was a stop sign. But I'm confident out here that we can relay that message just with signs.
Oh. Thank you. I have a few questions. I guess I'll start, I'll kind of carry on with David Hodges' questions and ask about that crosswalk, that particular intersection. Is there a potential to do like a sort of high visibility treatment, like a continental crosswalk there? It kind of looks like there is in the diagram, but just want to double check.
Committee Member Sanford, yes, we will be putting in high visibility crosswalks, whether it's a stop sign or a traffic signal. That's our practice at every intersection now. As well, just for pedestrian safety, with the all-way stop configuration, we will be building a median refuge of sorts, so there will be space in the middle of the road that pedestrians can break up their crossing.
Great. My second question was, when you were going over option 2, you mentioned that the buffered bike lane would have buffers in some places and possibly not in others. Can you share more about where those will be and how that decision is sort of fits into this?
Okay. Yes, this section right in here where my mouse is dragging back and forth. The road's about 54 feet wide right there. And that is just enough room for angle parking, bike lanes, and traffic lanes. There's really not a lot of extra room. On either side of that, in this area here, and down by the guardrail, if people are familiar with the guardrail next to the bike path, the road widens out to 60 feet from 54, so there's 6 extra feet to work with. So through those areas, certainly makes sense to me that that's extra space be used to provide buffers between vehicle lanes and bike lanes. And as well, through the S-turns and out to Los Patos, there'll be lots of room for buffers.
Great, thank you.
Would you define what buffer options there are? What buffers are you talking about? Delineators?
Oh, thank you. Buffers are just painted buffers. So they're a separation in the road between where the bike lane is and the vehicle lane is. It's a possibility to put delineators along the north side of the road because there's no need for cars to be moving back and forth across. But on the south side of the road, particularly in here where we would still have some parallel parking, vehicles do need to move back and forth over the bike lane in order to access the parking area, so that wouldn't be possible there.
Okay.
One last question. Doesn't back-end parking reduce the chance of a cyclist being doored significantly?
Yes. Yes, that's a great point. Thank you.
Okay, we'll have much more time for questions after the public comment, if you'd like to go ahead now or wait.
Yeah, just a really quick one.
Go ahead.
What are the primary differences with moving the parking spaces from closer to the residences to closer to the western, or I guess eastern? I don't know. I call it West Beach, but East Beach. Sorry. I don't know. What's the difference in moving the parking spaces further in this situation? Like, is there a trade-off with keeping them further from the intersection?
Well, it's a preference of whether or not there's a community preference for an all-way stop versus a traffic signal. That's one preference. I think they're going to operate very similarly. There's benefits to both. For through traffic, the traffic signal is definitely preferred. As far as delay goes, if I lived in the neighborhood, I would want an all-way stop because it would get me out a lot faster. So that the intersection control is one consideration. The quantity of parking spaces is another consideration. And as well, the aesthetics are a consideration as well.
Okay, thank you.
All right, I think thank you very much for your presentation.
Thank you.
I'm sure you'll be back up here in a little bit. We have a few public comments. Terrific. Okay. Okay. All right. I think I'll go ahead and that's interesting. All right, let's start with Guy Cranes.
Yes. I can speak to you just as well.
No, you can't.
Okay, what's recording?
You're on TV.
Okay, I'm on TV.
Okay.
Regarding the experience when the mast was down. Okay, I live in East Beach Townhomes on the corner of Cabrillo and Niños. I spend time on my back deck. I see the intersection more than any person, and I see more than any sensor sees. My view would benefit most from the removal of the traffic lights. I wait to turn left at the traffic lights. Please don't change to stop signs. It would not be safe. Regrettably, I didn't know who to call during the period when the intersection was controlled by stop signs. Otherwise, I would have called every other day. Dangerous pedestrians interactions, many. And a big after you, Alphonse, delay response. You've got a 4-lane versus 4-lane. I don't believe any of the other high-volume stop signs that were mentioned are 4-lane versus 4-lane. It simply worked terribly. I'm there, I see it, I see more than the sensors, and I do not think it's safe. I would benefit personally. Okay. Lastly, on weekends, 1,157 pedestrians, they start pushing a button for a crosswalk. How long is Cabrillo going to be stopped dead while somebody else pushes a button to cross? Okay. Secondly, the mentioning of the advantage of additional parking while not noting that there are 100 spaces that are out of service at the Cabrillo Pavilion right now is just silly. I mean, you're talking about the benefit of additional parking. Yes, there is, but there's 100 spaces out of service. Please do not make this decision on the basis of additional parking when the facts say things will be better when? June, maybe December. Number 3, are you really ready to put 1,200 linear feet of continuous back-in angle parking after the first rollout in the city with a couple of gaps for entries? Even the East Shift plan has over 600 continuous feet of back-in angle parking. Where else in the city do we have that much continuous angle parking any direction on any street? So first thing we're going to do is put 1,200 feet of it on the beachfront? I don't think so. The point that was raised that we could do this with about 200 feet of back-in angle parking is real simple. The wood fence that they mentioned backs in on an area of the grassy area that does not have any picnic tables, any activities. You can easily put in 210 feet of this and not risk the implications of a kid kicking a ball out into the street. So I think the alternatives that you should be considering here. I have one last point. Yeah, I will be done in 20 seconds. I will give you a copy of an article from the Steamboat Springs pilot. They are considering pulling out all of their back-in angle parking in the spring. The number one statistic cited in here is that in one section of their back-in angle parking, only 48% of the people actually park the right way, 52% the wrong way. And then on the best part that they have, according to this article, 20% of the people still park the wrong way. What is the safety of somebody backing out having parked incorrectly? This was after more than a year of these things being in place. So let me give that to the Secretary and thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see. Wes Johnson.
Madam Chair, members of the committee, my name is Wes Johnson. I live in East Beach too, but I don't speak for the community, just my wife and I. I'd like to put emphasis on the fact that during the week the traffic gets heaviest on Cabrillo going eastbound when people are trying to avoid the jam on the freeway. You're going to constrict this down to one lane. At the same time, people are leaving the beach because the sun's going down. And the hope is that we will reduce U-turn problems. There's only one option that really addresses the U-turn. We had one fatality, it was from a U-turn. And so I would ask the committee to consider the fact of whether or not option 4 does not need to have a center concrete and incur that expense. There are other alternatives. I think signage, we've all seen the little flippy short items that get put in the street. Most people will comply with the law if you give them an opportunity to do that. So your decision, not mine. I do think the comment that Guy made with regard to people traveling westbound, seeing an open, free slant parking and going into it is going to occur because we do not get a lot of parking traffic officers down on the beach. And so people are just going to take a chance. And so once they're in the wrong way, they're going to have a devil of a time backing out. And so, I don't think we're going to increase undervision, or reduce undervision, the problems we're going to have with U-turns. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Barry Remus.
Option 3 U-turn radius slide, if you may. Sorry, Rob. The one that shows the U-turn. Jessica, thank you. Good evening, Chair Rodriguez and committee members. My name is Barry Remus, and I'm here representing COAST, the Coalition for Sustainable Transportation. We're asking, thank you. We're asking for you to really look at this through the Vision Zero lens, and ask yourselves what option of the 4 presented to you really presents the most safety for the most road users that can travel or that can utilize this stretch of Cabrillo Boulevard. When we ask ourselves that, we say to ourselves, okay, in an ideal sense, more of the back-end angled parking might present more safety to beachgoers, to families in terms of loading and unloading, as well as the increased sight lines, as well as something that Mr. Committee Member Hodges pointed out, a lessened risk of people being hit by opening doors. However, we do realize that we want to look for a compromise here because there's valid input, very valid input from community members, from residents in the Niños area that have expressed valid concerns as well regarding the intersection and the signalization or the lack thereof. So we've looked at this and we think that we would like to encourage you to look at option number 3, the hybrid approach, that seems to present a good compromise in terms of introducing a good amount of additional parking that's safe and provided that people park correctly, has been proven to work effectively to minimize risk to people that are parking, people that are riding their bikes, pedestrians in the area, families, etc. And that also helps to add that friction that Mr. Bailey talked about, because the more of that friction, the better, the safer the roadway is. In addition, option number 3 presents the compromise where this traffic signal at Niños and Cabrillo Boulevard is retained. And I believe, if I'm not mistaken, that we currently have a countdown, a walk signal there. Does that sound correct, I believe, at that intersection? Okay. In the absence of a traffic signal, that walk signal, I imagine, would be removed as well. So the retention of the traffic signal at that intersection could present additional perceived safety for pedestrians. So we'd like to ask you to consider option 3 as perhaps the best compromise. That picture there, which is close to it, if we go with that parallel parking on the right side, little bit of a concern that if somebody makes a U-turn out of there, they may approach the buffer on the opposite side, the westbound side, and swing into that buffer on the bike lane. But consider option 3. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see. Judy Frank.
Hi, Madam Chair and Committee. I'm also a resident at the East Beach Townhomes. I'm also the president of the HOA Association, and I'm speaking in part of some of the HOA members that live there and also as a president. This is just kind of a side note, other than the people that just live there. There's a news group that's on the internet. It's called Next Door East Beach Townhomes, I think it is. And if you go on there and read the comments about what people outside of our little community there have to say about the whole idea of taking down the stoplight, but also the back and angle parking and increasing the parking on Cabrillo to 90 some to 100 spaces. Aesthetically, what it turns into is a parking lot. So the beautiful vista that we all see driving into Santa Barbara on Cabrillo is now going to be a parking lot. So there's just a lot of negative feelings that I don't think you guys are aware of. I think it would behoove you to probably read comments from other people, and it's not just a small group here that don't appreciate it, but I think you need to take a look at it before you make a final decision, because it does impact a lot of people in Santa Barbara, not just us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's see. We have Jim Jaffe and Linda Jaffe. Whichever one of you would like to go first. And Mr. Jaffe, your form here says you mainly have a question for Mr. Bailey, or would you like to make some
there was no
remarks
chance
as well?
to ask him a question when you were, so I can put it forward now, and he'll get the question.
Okay, whatever,
Okay.
yeah.
Thank you, Chairwoman and committee, for having us here. I'm also a community member at East Beach Townhomes. My first thing I'd like to bring to you is when you get this on the website, which fortunately it was sent to us and we could read it before we got here. The only problem is there's confusion between what's on the website and what's presented here tonight. They're not as simple as 4 corresponding maps. There's 2A, B, C, and D, and 3, 2, and 1. And one of them has the parking for option number 3 as adding 11 parallel and 55 back in angle. And then the map that Derek showed tonight shows 28 and 50. So I'm confused by the way it was presented here tonight with the way I read it online that you all got and that we got. Be that as it may, I'm very much in favor of keeping the stop sign or the signal and not going to a 4-way. Regardless of these feelings about what happened during a non-critical time in Santa Barbara when that light was out for a few months, I can't imagine all the pedestrians coming from the zoo when Cabrillo opens up, the beach people coming also from the communities around there, trying to compete and all look at each other, deciding at a 4-way stop who's going to go first and how those pedestrians are going to get across. You won't believe the number of families that have to cross with baby carriages and stuff. I mean, lots of gear, we'll put it that way. So in terms of safety, it has to be a signal. You are also adding 2 bike lanes. So not only do 4 drivers have to decide when they come to that intersection, and the pedestrians have to decide, but then what are the bikes going to do at a 4-way stop? Are they going to stop and all look at each other? So now you possibly have a lot of people looking at each other to see who's going to go first. If you change it, big problem for the city. Okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
I'm in favor of number 3.
Still want me?
Sure.
Derek, do you mind if we had that other picture of the intersection that I wanted to refer to? The one before this? Oh, sorry. Thank you for allowing me to speak. Where to start? I just want to say that when we first saw any proposal, we were overwhelmingly happy that there was going to be bike lanes and it was going to be resurfaced and some attention to this area, and that the whole vision idea was Vision Zero was a good idea. So I think this was not met by our community with a lot of resistance at all. The part that we've come saying, it's not headlines on our balconies, it's not aesthetics. I think every single one of us, and I think when you gave the statistics today, it wasn't exactly statistics, it were some like this and quite a few like this and most. We didn't have any really quantitative information. But if that's how we're going to give information, I believe overwhelmingly that stop sign was not an option that people thought was safe at all. It needs to be a signal. I know you're looking at February statistics and President's Day, but you're not looking at summer, you're not looking at vacation time. There's a big difference. I wanted to go back to this because the 4-way stop, I think you know where the intersection is there. It's not a traditional perpendicular intersection. It comes off of a curve on when we come out of our Los Niños. It's at a curve, and then the 4th direction is coming out of the parking lot that services that restaurant and all. People are pulling in there, people are pulling out there. It's not a perpendicular kind of a stop situation. Now you've never had bike lane coming east. As my husband said, you're introducing that whole other factor there. And the fact that where a stop sign is going to be, that bikes, that pedestrians, that everybody is going to see that, be on the same page exactly. It's hard enough with a signal that's stopping lanes. I think it's going to stop bikers better with a signal. It's going to give families, even if you have a median, that really doesn't help small children and dogs and the families get halfway across the street. That's not a safe situation for families and little kids to get halfway across the street and then wait for it to change again. It doesn't make a lot of sense. So I think you have a unique kind of an intersection there that you have to look at. And just from the Vision Zero kind of a statement, I think a lot of our resistance to the back-in parking, one, we say to you, it increases the density of parking there. And you say, oh, they don't want their views. They don't want more cars down there. I think what you're looking at is what you identified in your Zero Vision is that U-turns is a hazard. So you're just by numbers adding more cars and more density and now introducing many more cars, dozens of more cars to make a U-turn. This isn't the safest part of our city. This is kind of a cozy beach access, and that's where it came from. And now you're packing in lots of cars, and that's great. But you're also just statistically adding the chance for more collisions. So I'm supporting 3.
Thank you very much. Do we have any other public comment before I wrap that up? Nope. Okay. Well, do we want to start with discussion, questions, and then maybe make a motion?
Maybe a few questions and comments. A couple for Mr. Bailey. And thank you for the presentation, and thank you all for being here. And I really appreciate I had a chance to go to the listening workshop. I want to thank city staff. You really got it down. You know how to do it. I know the people I talked to were of all kinds of opinions, more opinions than people. And the people I talked to felt like they were heard and listened to, and were given really good explanations of why we're even doing this. So I appreciate that, and it really means a lot. When it comes to the always stop versus the light, I was just hearing kind of some concerning things about four-way stops, and I just want to clarify and make sure I'm on the right page with regards to like how you're supposed to conduct yourself as a pedestrian or as a motorist at a four-way stop. So it's my understanding that a four-way stop that has, crosswalks like this one does and would, pedestrians have the right-of-way to cross, right?
Committee member Blackerby, they do have the right-of-way. Once they're in the crosswalk, they've legally established right-of-way.
Right.
So if there's a vehicle that pulls up to the stop sign and they're passing through the intersection, they have to let that vehicle clear before they can step into the intersection. And
right, but the car, in theory, this is generally what happens at a four-way stop. The car stops, and if the pedestrian, the car stop. I walk all the time through a four-way stop, so maybe I've been doing it wrong. But if car stops and I'm there on the corner, they go, "Yep, all right, go through," and give the pedestrian right away. Am I wrong on that, or is that?
No, you're absolutely correct.
Okay.
And I think the concern that we heard from people was that the actual stop sign compliance wouldn't be as good at the larger intersection as it would be at a tighter intersection.
Okay. So yeah, I just wanted to make sure. And then someone else mentioned that if there were a four-way stop, if the light were taken out and there were a four-way stop, that that cars would never get through because there's so many pedestrians, they'd be pressing a button all the time to cross the crosswalk, but there wouldn't be a button, right? If there's a four-way stop.
Correct. There wouldn't be a button. And, when pedestrians cross the street, everybody else has to wait. Right. But overall, delays are very comparable between the traffic signal and the always stop.
Right. So then I had a question about the number 3. So I know that one of the points of number 2 was, or kind of a possible issue was, that it was starting too close to the intersection. It was starting, the back-end angle parking was starting too close to the intersection, and it might not give people an opportunity, or it would back things up. Is the reason that you think that wouldn't happen if there was a light in option 3? Because they would be, so here's my question. When I look at option 3, I see that there's parallel parking really close to the intersection. So if you go to number 3.
This is option number 2 that we're showing here.
Right.
And this option does have about half a dozen parallel parking spaces. But the reason that an always stop would be a lot more compatible with that angle parking beginning here is in this space between the intersection and that first angle parking space, you're merging traffic together.
Right. That wasn't my question. So I'll save you time, because I know what you're about to say.
Okay.
What my question is about the other version. So number 3. So the parallel parking is, it's very close to the intersection. When I think of parallel parking and kind of blocking a lane to do it, I think, to me, that would take me longer, and I'm out in the lane more than I would be if I was doing back and angled. Is the reason that it's like, whatever, keep parallel parking here pretty close to that intersection is because they'd be doing it in the bike lane and the buffer? Or I guess what I'm saying is, like, wouldn't people doing parallel parking still, and maybe even more, spend more time in the travel lane than rear angle parking? Is that making any sense?
It makes perfect sense, yes.
Okay.
And the answer to your question is, so first, the first parking space would be immediately east of the bridge, the first parallel parking space. And that would largely be taking place within the bike lane and the buffer, so it would be out of the vehicle travel lane. But I think your perception of the amount of time that it would take to perform the maneuver is good.
So then that flips back to number 2. There is parallel parking. There is still a little bit of parallel parking maintained.
Oops, wrong way.
Prior to the back and angle parking.
There is.
But it's sort of, there's kind of a little, it looks like.
There's space there because
in the
the
shoulder.
lanes are starting to taper over, so there's room.
Okay. Yeah, that's just something that I was wondering. I'm like, I feel like I would spend more time blocking the travel lane with, than if I were parallel parking than I were doing back in. Thank you. I want to say that I really like the fact that the back and angle parking has ADA spaces. I think it's a big deal, and I think for coastal access, if you think about people using a wheelchair or mobility device right now, so say the bathhouse was open and those parking lots were open. If you wanted to get over to the volleyball courts, it's a kind of a schlep, for lack of a better word, right? Like you really you'd have to wheel pretty far to get over there. There's a sidewalk, but like it's a pretty long jaunt. So I think that's huge. I think we should be adding that any chance we get. We put any kind of parking in, and I realize we don't put in a lot of parking, which I would imagine I figured you'd be, people would bring you balloons and flowers for adding parking in the city of Santa Barbara, but I guess that's not how it turned out this way. I think I know, at least the Coastal Commission could send a nice note that we're putting more coastal parking here. But I'm assuming is this timed? Not timed? Parking? Has that been discussed?
The plan is to keep the current operation.
Okay.
It's unrestricted parking.
Right.
But there's no overnight parking. So you could arrive
Right.
in the morning and leave.
Right. Say that again.
Sorry. The plan is that to maintain existing operations, which is unrestricted parking, except there is an overnight parking prohibition. So somebody could arrive in the morning and leave in the evening.
Okay, got it.
But not park overnight.
Right. And then the question that people brought up about people traveling westbound and saying, ooh, a parking space. Is there some kind of signage that and flipping over and doing it the wrong way? It's a totally valid question. How do other areas deal with that? And then is there some kind of signage that could go up, or what's the plan with that?
There are signs that will go up, and there will be some public outreach and education that has to happen in order to, even though we've had this public process, there's people in the community that aren't familiar with back-end angle parking yet, so we will need to try to reach out to them. There will be signs, and the city is working on a mechanism that will increase our ability to do enforcement in this area as well.
Okay. And I again want to remind the community and the committee that the whole point of this is Vision Zero, and the point is someone died and people got really injured badly, which I want those projects in my neighborhood personally to make it safer, because it could happen to any one of you, right, coming or going home. We've established that the roadway is not as safe as it could be, and I think it's our duty, and I really appreciate the city staff taking this commitment very seriously. I'm glad that the council is as well. So I think above all else, safety really needs to be the most important thing, and is now the most important thing, thankfully, that we think about. Just as people were talking about views, and we throw around the word vision a lot, just reminding people that Vision Zero, though it says vision, is not about views, right? It's about actually a vision of zero serious injuries or fatalities, and it's something we have to, remain steadfast in, no matter what people think it looks like, and it's new and different, and but I really appreciate that focus. So I'm still mulling over the options. Want to hear from fellow committee members.
To go on this line, Chair Rodriguez, Mr. Bailey, if I could ask a couple more quick questions. Let's talk about compliance. So U-turn compliance. One of the concerns, and I believe it was, I'm sorry if I only caught your first name, Wes, mentioned, basically making clear sort of the legality of no U-turn, because the current condition is U-turns are legal, correct? So I guess the concern being, and this is going to get to, I think, an issue that I'm mulling on of perceived safety versus overall safety. So let's say there's U-turns are illegal. What's likely in terms of U-turn compliance? And different treatments and different options, but in general.
So my prediction, if we were to put up no U-turn signs along Cabrillo and make it illegal, is that compliance would be poor. And the reason for that is that there is a demand to go westbound on Cabrillo. And drivers, what we find elsewhere in the city when we put up traffic control devices, if the drivers perceive the restriction is reasonable, and we give them a reasonable alternative to try and get where they're trying to go, compliance can be good. But if we just put up no U-turn signs, what alternative are we providing people to go westbound on Cabrillo? Where are they supposed to make that turn? How are they supposed to get back into town? There's no cross streets out here that they can turn around at until you get to Los Patos, and I think it's very unlikely that people are going to drive 3/4 of a mile to Los Patos and 3/4 of a mile back just to turn around at an intersection. So my feeling is that compliance would be very poor if we were to put up no U-turn signs.
And it was option 4 that had the center median and then had the jug handle. And by the way, would that even be feasible? Is that the city right of way? Would the jug handle be on city right of way?
It is.
Okay. So, in terms of pedestrian crossings on along Cabrillo, especially, I guess this is kind of an interesting challenge to visualize out. I believe it was Guy, our first speaker, who pointed out just physically being there and seeing the situation in terms of those crossings when it was an all-way stop, effectively. Yeah. So I'm very familiar with the non-all-way stop, which is, I forget the street, but basically into the parking lot. That's the main feeder for East Beach.
Corona Del Mar.
Corona Del Mar, where there's no stop. And that's obviously a lot more tricky, and a lot of regular traffic, all the hotel goers, and a lot of people who park in that lot and avoid the waterfront, or park in those streets and avoid the waterfront parking fees. So how does sort of no stop for 4-lane crossing versus always stop 4-lane crossing versus signalized 4-way crossing compare from your perspective and engineering background?
Corona Del Mar has less side street traffic than Niños, so the need for a stop sign isn't there. The purpose of a stop sign is to provide right of way for the side street and pedestrians on that side street to access the main road. And the demand just isn't there at Corona Del Mar. We do want pedestrian safety there, which is why the pedestrian activated flashers were added. But it wouldn't operate very well as a stop sign. Drivers, they queue in very quickly if they pull up to a stop sign and there's never any side street traffic that they encounter. That stop will turn into a roll, and that's what leads to poor stop sign compliance. Disrespect of a traffic control device. Niños is busier, but it is a wide street. So we are thinking of treatments like there's not just going to be a stop sign on the right-hand side, there'll have to be a stop sign in the middle of the street as well. We really want to try and make a feel that they have to stop as well. But certainly it is a wider street. And our experience when the traffic signal was inoperable for those first few days, stop sign compliance wasn't very good. But it got better when we added the additional signs. So it's really hard to look into the crystal ball and say which is going to be safer, an always stop or a traffic signal. I can tell you that this is a really low collision traffic signal location. So we're starting at a really good place with the traffic signal. But there is a lot of side street delay and pedestrian delay associated with that traffic signal as well. So it's a very hard one to predict.
Well, then if I could ask, you have a slide with the collisions on the sort of S-turns. Are we within the map in terms of collisions in the intersection and not including it with Niños? Or how would those compare to the 2013, 2017 crashes? Do we also have crashes that hit that level of this in that intersection?
No, not nearly. I believe there were 5 collisions over a 10-year period at Niños, so like one every other year, and that's really good for a busy intersection. We'd obviously like to see 0, but just in terms of our experience with other intersections in the city, a major intersection like that with about 1 collision every other year is a low collision location.
Thank you. That's very helpful. So to go into comments, which is what you'd like, correct, Chair Rodriguez? And we can just go through the line of comments, or do you like me to hold?
Well, I'd like to question the committee. I don't want to slow down the discussion or limit it in any way, but would we function more effectively if someone were to make a motion that we could discuss and either go for or against it, and then if we go against it, we move on to a new motion? Because we could have a much longer discussion that might not be necessary if people are generally on the same page.
Sure. Sorry.
I'd like to ask a few questions before we make motions. I think they'll help inform the motions.
Okay.
Okay, thank you.
Sure.
Okay. So with the stop sign option, do you think that would help people with the back end parking? Because one of the things that I feel like affects this design is that if we, obviously lack of compliance with the stop sign, it's been a really interesting discussion. But one of the benefits of the stop sign that I see is that if you have cars coming to a full stop before they continue on the road, they'll be approaching that parking zone slower. And so I feel like on this stretch of road, people, I don't know if you guys have done a speed survey, but I feel like people do tend to kind of go a little faster, hence the need for this redesign. So I know we're already doing a lot to increase the friction, and hopefully people will slow down. But with that stop sign option, do you feel like that helps those people who are back in parking for the first time, possibly?
Yes, I think the back-in angle parking will generally operate better if there's an always stop, and not just the first time, every time. One way this is going to change the character of the corridor, and and the reason we're trying to change the character of the corridor is to control speeds overall, to reduce collisions into the wall at the S-turns, to reduce the severity of collisions that are happening. But one thing to think about is just think about traffic today going eastbound on Cabrillo, and they go through the intersection at Niños on a green light, and the speed limit's 35, which means that people are probably doing 35 or 40. And then they're entering an area with increased parking density. An alternate perspective is just like you say, it's an always stop controlled intersection. Drivers are leaving that intersection from zero or close to zero, and they're entering that corridor in a much more controlled way. And it really sets the tone for the corridor compared to the traffic signal. So while the traffic signal, like I mentioned, operates really well, it's likely that we would probably have less mid-block collisions with an always stop, just because we're introducing better speed control.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I guess I'll just say this for consideration of the group, but one of my concerns with the stop sign is that in light of the fact that we have some questionable compliance, and it does put the responsibility of the crossing on the pedestrian, I feel like there are certain intersections in Santa Barbara that are unsignalized, specifically like some of the ones that are on De La Vina right now, where you have to be a really confident pedestrian to enter that space. And I'm wondering if how this change would affect people crossing there, and how confident people, especially families with children, would feel entering it. I want to ask another question. With the back-in angled parking, do you think there will be a number of people? I know we discussed, and one of the commenters brought up the possibility of traffic that's approaching Santa Barbara, just like kind of, I don't know, like scooting in there and grabbing a space. I think the other thing to think about is, will people just immediately upon leaving the space, exiting, will they cross that center line and turn a left, going back to downtown? So crossing the eastbound lane and just hang into the westbound lane. And I'm really concerned about that maneuver. And I guess I'll let you speak to what you think of that.
Yes, people will absolutely make that maneuver, and we're encouraging that.
Oh, okay.
Because people want to go that direction right now, and there's a demand for it, and that's why people are doing it. So what we're trying to do is, if they're going to make that maneuver, let's make it as safe as possible. If they are going to pull out of that parking space and turn left to go west on Cabrillo, they'll have really good sight lines in both directions so they can make a good decision. Right now, people just generally can't see far enough in both directions to consistently make a good decision. We want to put them in a good position where they can make a good decision.
Okay, that really actually wasn't clear to me from this presentation. So the goal of this one of the goals of the back and angle parking is that people will turn left and head in the direction of their choice back towards
Well, to
downtown
be able
Santa
to make
Barbara.
their maneuver safely. We want to accommodate the demand safely.
Okay. And I'll just add a quick comment. I'm questioning the appropriateness of a U-turn on this stretch of the road. And I just think that if we're taking this back to Vision Zero, it seems like the traffic collision that resulted in a death was from a U-turn. So it's interesting to me. I guess we have two options, and one is to design this better so that way people can make that U-turn safer, and the other is to say that the U-turn is like inherently dangerous in this section and then not allow it here. And it seems to me that the question is, would people comply with that? And my hope is that, especially when there's going to be a roundabout further from here, correct? My hope is that they would go to that roundabout and turn around, but I also acknowledge that that's like something I would do, and I'm a more patient driver, and so I don't. Yeah, but I mean, I've been brought up in the culture of Vision Zero, so that's my 2 cents on that. I have a question about one specific section where you cross Sycamore Creek. I think that's actually Sycamore. I'm not actually sure what that is, but close to Los Niños. I wish you could like zoom in on this. But when the 2 car lanes that are eastbound cross over and are heading, and then the 2 eastbound lanes kind of merge into one lane, and the bike lane is to the right of that. I'm concerned that when 2 cars are merging and there's a bike lane and room runs out, which sometimes does, that the bike lane will be the losing person there, the person on the bicycle. And I'm concerned that could be creating conflict. I would love to see some sort of treatment there, but it does look like it's a really tight space. But I'm curious what your thoughts on that are.
Yeah, that's a great point. But I think that reinforces why we feel like with this configuration, an all-way stop is more appropriate, just so those speeds are much more under control. But you're right; it is a constrained area, and so there are not a lot of options for providing any additional buffering right there.
Is there any room for? Well, okay, I have so many papers up here, but I think option 2 shows a small zone that is like near the intersection on the west side of the intersection. Sorry, on the east side, that is striped with like a differentiating between the directions of traffic. But that's and then further to the intersection. So is it possible to move some of the space from there and create some more space between the bike lane and those merging lanes?
I apologize. Would you mind repeating?
Oh, yeah, just closer to the intersection. So right there where it crosses that creek, that's the kind of conflict zone in the eastbound bike lane that I'm thinking of.
Right in here?
Is it possible to reallocate some space from the center divide that you have to buffering that bike lane there?
Yes.
Or, I mean...
Yeah, I see what you're saying, and yes, there is.
Sorry, and I realize this meeting is not to I'll just bring that up as like a question. And then I think that's everything that I have to ask. Thank you.
Thank you.
I think I have some questions, if that's all right. Okay. I'm the chairman. What the heck? Now I've lost my papers. Well, I was concerned about the fence going away, and actually some of the volleyball people indicated to me that the ice plant stops the volleyballs from going in the street, which I didn't know. But I still have mixed feelings about losing that little fence. I have to be honest about that. When you talked with Ed about the intersection, you guys had your dialogue about the intersection being safe for the last 10 years or so, sort of acceptable levels of accident. Has it had a signal during that whole period?
Yes, the signal was installed in the mid-90s, Rob, is that about right?
Yeah.
About 1995 it's been, so
Okay.
over 20 years.
Okay, I wanted to clarify my own knowledge, understanding of that
It was a two-way stop before it was a signal.
before it was a signal.
So there was no stopping for Cabrillo and stopping for Ninos.
And
the parking lot.
got it. Okay, and I would like to comment. Maybe you could review this again because I think it's really helpful, really important. When we went to the community meeting down in the night of the storm, I think you gave a really excellent explanation of the difference between the two U-turns, and talked about when a U-turn is done with street realignment, people have more time to be aware of what they're doing. I can't, please say it in traffic engineer language. Thank you.
Thank you. We brought back up on the screen a picture of how people are making U-turns today with the existing roadway configuration. So there's 2 eastbound lanes, 2 westbound lanes, and against the beach there is the parallel parking aisle. So the concept is a term called the conflict point. And so if you can think of a vehicle in this number 2 lane going eastbound right next to the row of cars parked, and if somebody pulls out suddenly, the place where they would collide is called the conflict point. It's where paths of travel for different vehicles cross. Today, that conflict point is really close to the parking aisle, and it doesn't provide a lot of reaction time for drivers to react to one another. Going down to the other picture we had. This is next to where the parallel parking would be in alternative number 3. That eastbound traffic lane is moved pretty far from the parallel parking aisle. And so if somebody were to make a U-turn with that configuration, that conflict point is moved way out compared to where it is right now. And this person going eastbound, they have a lot more time to see somebody starting that U-turn and react to them. The person making the U-turn, they actually have a chance to pull around and almost get square before they cross that path of travel. So they're more likely to see somebody coming. And so the whole concept of improving the conflict point location and improving sight lines is a lot better with this configuration.
I thought that was well worth reiterating. And I do have a further question. If that were coming out of one of the new parking spaces, the ones that are reverse angle, what would your comment be?
Well, this don't have a graphic, but I think this photograph is a really good illustration. So this fellow getting ready to pull out of that parking spot, we actually don't know which way he's going to go. Is he going to turn right and continue on the same direction that the cyclist is going, or he could be trying to turn left? But either way, as he's pulling out, he has really good sight lines in both directions. So no matter which way he turns, he has the visual cues to make either maneuver safely.
Thank you. Mr. Hodges?
Thank you.
Sure.
Mr. Bailey, I'd like to speak to Ms. Jaffe's point, which is as we increase the number of parking spaces and increase the safety for making the U-turn, the number of U-turns will increase also. And then the other piece would be that if we have a stop sign there, the speeds are slower, so people can more safely make that U-turn. If we move the back-in parking further out, as in 3, then someone could make the green light at the signal and be going still quite fast when that person is trying to make that turn. So even though there's a perceived greater safety with option 3, there's a limitation created by the green light scenario. Could you speak to that, please?
Actually, Madam Chair, Commissioner, Committee Member Hodges, if I could just as a point of clarification request, should we call the turn movement from reverse angle parking a U-turn versus a left turn?
I would refer to it as a left turn.
Because the difference of a 180 turn versus like not even a 120, more like a 100 or 110 degree turn is that sight line. And so I feel like there's a little bit of confusion introduced to the conversation by using the term U-turn for the reverse angle parking. So anyway, I think it's really important.
Okay.
But specifically, I'd like you to speak to Ms. Jaffe's point of a greater number of left turns being made because of denser parking and crossing the roadway.
Yes. So if we increase the parking supply, we would obviously expect more left turns and U-turns to be made from the if there were an area of parallel parking that was left over. Certainly, the more times a maneuver is performed, every maneuver carries a risk, even it might be 0.000, but if anything is done 10 million times, which, a lot of traffic in Santa Barbara, if you think of year upon year, we eventually get to that number, something could happen. The thing about the back-in angle parking, though, is just that we've put people in a really good position to make a good decision. So the likelihood is really low that that type of collision pattern would continue. But certainly there's always a risk.
Any more comments or questions? Would anyone?
But I'll go after Ms. Horn.
Oh, go ahead, Susan.
I'm withdrawing my thought.
Well, would anyone like to make a motion for recommending either 2 or 3?
I will make a motion, but first I have one more question. If that's okay.
Well, I guess.
Thank you very much. Appreciate your indulgence. So we've talked about, and I've certainly experienced it, the light, the existing light, right? I personally, if I lived there, I'd want a 4-way stop, but here we are, for all the reasons stated, and for getting through the light. My most common turning movement if I go through that intersection, is turning left onto Niños to either drop off or pick someone up at the Airbus stop at the Hyatt there. And that left turn cycle feels like an eternity. So I guess my question is there any, and you admit, right, it's a very long cycle. Does the cycle have to stay the way it is on that light if the light's kept there? If so, I'm sure there's a perfectly good explanation. But if not, is that something that could be, worked with at all? I'm not sure. Makes sense?
The traffic signal at Cabrillo and Niños operates on detection, so it kind of operates on demand. So if you're waiting to make that eastbound left turn from Cabrillo into the neighborhood, oncoming traffic has to clear. And once it's cleared, then side street traffic is going to go, and then you get your turn. There's really no way to tighten up the signal cycle length without truncating one of those movements, cutting somebody off. And that's typically not our practice in the city.
Sure.
So,
yeah, the weird part is my experience is usually really late at night or really early in the morning, and there's no one coming, and I can't turn left.
well, that shouldn't be happening.
Yeah.
We'll take a look at that.
Haven't done it in a few months, but it is a thing that occurs. So that's might be a good time to
Could
check
be a
up on that
malfunction. Yes,
on
thank
that
you.
cycle. But I will make the first motion that we recommend that City Council finds options 2 and 3 of the project consistent with the Vision Zero strategy. I'm not yet making the other motion, but that's one motion, one finding that I think we need to make to move forward.
I'll second that.
Thanks.
Discussion.
Sorry, do you want me to say why I did that, or I'm happy to.
I think I'm wondering why we wouldn't want to recommend one over the other.
We would, but that would be a second motion.
Okay,
So
that helps.
So recommendation from staff was that we, one, find those two consistent with Vision Zero.
Mhm.
1 and 4 really aren't.
Right.
2 and 3 are.
Okay.
We think those are safe. One might be better than the other, and that would be whatever a possible next motion would be. But I want to at least say that they are, go on record saying they are consistent. Both of those are consistent with the Vision Zero strategy.
Thank you for the clarification. All right, we have a motion and a second?
Yes.
Okay, all in favor?
Aye.
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 Any opposition? No.
That was easy.
That was very easy. Okay, moving right along, who would like to make a motion about 2 or 3?
I'd like, go ahead.
One question, if I can.
Please.
Would it be possible with the 4, if we went with the stop sign option, could one of those lanes be a left turn lane? On either side.
It's possible, but I would not recommend that. And the reason is the whole concept. I think you've heard from the community tonight that the size of the intersection is concerning. And because of the size of the intersection, stop sign compliance is an issue. The more lanes you add, I think you would certainly introduce stop sign compliance issues. And just from a capacity perspective, it's really not needed.
Well, just for clarification, I'm just saying you have 2 lanes on either side, and one of the 2 eastbound is a left turn lane, and one of the 2 westbound is a left turn lane. So I'm not adding another lane.
I understand. I apologize. Misunderstood the question. The eastbound, definitely not. We would create a lot of congestion. There does need to be 2 available through lanes to handle the volumes. The eastbound volumes are quite a bit higher than westbound. For westbound, it may be possible. We would have to recalculate that. I can't answer with any certainty, but eastbound, we definitely need 2 through lanes. Yep.
Thank you.
Can I put forth 2 quick questions? I don't know what this process is exactly.
This is the time.
Okay, thank you. So, number one, I'm curious, what was the justification for installing the traffic signal there in the first place? I'm not sure if that was before your time or if anyone here knows, but it sounds like previous to the signal, there was a 2-way stop. And then, and just for the TCC members, I'm curious because traffic signals are a considerable investment. So I'm just, if we're going to take one out, I'd like to know why we put it in there. And thank you.
Go ahead. Rob knows this one very well.
So there was a lot of pedestrians. There was a lot of pedestrians crossing that road, and there was very, very poor yield, and the speeds through the area were very, very high. So mainly the lack of yielding is because cars are moving so fast. They were moving so fast, and the intersection's so big that there was not a lot of yielding, and so. That's what the warrant was established based on pedestrian volume in the intersection. So that's why the signal's there. And just to be clear, it was a 2-way stop controlled. So Niños in the parking lot stopped and Cabrillo was free flow.
I think it's worth mentioning too that in the 1990s, Cabrillo was a Caltrans operated highway. State Road 225, and an all-way stop was not acceptable to Caltrans, so it wasn't even an option. If it was a city road at the time, it may have been considered instead of a traffic signal, but because it was a Caltrans operated roadway, traffic signal was the only acceptable solution.
Okay, thank you. That's super helpful context.
May I add something on that?
Yeah.
That topic. Having used that intersection for over 40 years, took my kids there to the zoo and watched that whole area grow up. And it was awful. If you had a stroller, you had young kids, and you were trying to use a walkability model and maybe park over by the bathhouse and then go over to the zoo or whatever, you just didn't want to do it. And the way that there is a parking lot as one of the four corners of an intersection is really very different than just two streets coming together. So I really relate to what the residents have been saying, that you get a really odd juxtaposition, and frequently when that parking lot reopens after the Cabrillo Pavilion is fixed, there's going to be a lot of tourists coming out of that parking lot who haven't got a clue where they are, and they're trying to figure out how to get to the next place. So I have a lot of personal difficulty with the stop sign idea, having experienced it when there wasn't one, and kind of was relieved when it finally got put in, even though you have to wait. It's I think because we have it's such a heavy tourist area and a residential area, there's a lot of factors that mitigate, I think, the need for a stop sign. Although, what you said about, when people have the green light going along Cabrillo, if there is I'm sorry, I can't think of the right words. I don't have the right words. The process that makes them slow down. Side friction. I like that term. That will, people that use that street, when they see that lane's going to narrow on them, are going to start slowing down. And to me, all the residents are going to benefit from slower traffic along there, even if there is a little more parking. Slower traffic is a good thing. And I do have one more question. Sorry to interrupt you, Eve. I'm sorry. And that is, what's going to happen with the existing bike lane that the people use for the one that's off to the side, that's got like a hedge?
The Class 1 bike path?
Yeah, that's not going to go away, is it?
It will remain, and just as a point of interest, it's scheduled to be maintained and resurfaced this spring, so it'll be in good condition for years to come.
Well, in the public discussion that we went to, which was very interesting, as my colleague said, learned a lot from the people that live across the street. The Surreys and the walkers and the bikes all use it, and I think that if we do put in new bike lanes, which we hope is going to happen here, the serious bikers who are trying to get downtown or the other way will use that, and then everybody will have a place to take their slow bike or their fast bike. So those are my comments. Sorry. Okay, Eve, you had more.
Yeah, I just have one more question about that turn movement, left turn, not a U-turn, when someone exits the angle parking and heads west. So in that case, did the city consider, because it sounds like one of the driving reasons behind facilitating that turn is that people simply won't comply if we ban it, and that there's a desire to give people that movement as soon as possible. In the design process, do you consider installing some sort of middle, not a full-on median perhaps, in order to not give up that width, but posts or a delineator or some type of treatment that would physically enforce them not making that movement? And is that feasible in this?
It's feasible. We did discuss it at the public meeting. It did come up. Those posts, they get hit, and they look shabby after a while, and it would take a lot of them. The density of the posts have to be such that there's no gaps where anybody could turn around. We couldn't put them every 30 or 40 feet like on Coda Street, for example. So just from an aesthetic perspective, we don't feel like they'd be very well supported, and from a maintenance perspective, we'd be out there replacing them pretty frequently. But it is certainly is possible, and it could be an effective way to eliminate the U-turns, or at least make people go down to the end, similar to the center median.
Okay, and I ask that because I still have concerns about that movement, because it seems very tied to the I guess it's challenging for me to picture it. I know that this overall design will calm the street. It's more to the whole TCC. I know this whole design will calm the street, but it's challenging to picture people making that movement safely. And it seems, especially because there are multiple directions of pretty much effectively 3 lanes of traffic to consider. You have, the oncoming bicyclists to look for from one direction, and then oncoming cars to look at from the other direction. And then sometimes cars coming from the creek direction on the right-hand side are going pretty fast. And so it seems like you're creating an opportunity for human error. I'm hoping that with a slower speed, people can get it. But just like that's a thought that crosses my mind in this design. And that movement is somewhat tied to the original issue with the current design, which is that when people make the U-turns right now, it's not safe. And I recognize it's not a U-turn, it's now a 110-degree turn.
It's different.
Yeah. Okay, those are my thoughts. I'm happy to, if someone wants to start making motions. Thanks.
Do we have a motion?
I do. I'd like to move that we adopt option 3 because it has the most flexibility and is the most responsive to the community that lives there.
Second from Ms. Horn. All in favor?
Sorry.
Sorry. I guess I'm tired. I apologize.
If I could start. Thank you, Committee Member Hodges, for making that motion and starting this conversation. So this is a fabulous conversation in terms of, honestly, Vision Zero and getting into the nitty-gritty. I mean, we're getting down to details, and I think the community has done a great job of showing up, specifically residents. What is unfortunate, and I have to put on a hat for a moment as a 3-day-a-week, 4 days when I'm lucky, East Beach goer. There are so many ultimate Frisbee players, beach users, volleyball players, users of the facility at the East Beach Pavilion, which we're investing quite a bit in, who use that in a different way and have slightly different interests that are not well represented, unfortunately, in this public process. So I'm going to put on that hat for a moment and say, especially here within the coastal zone, and in terms of access to East Beach recreational opportunities, this parking is pretty critical. Even with the East Beach Pavilion, both lots being open, parking fills. On a Saturday or Sunday, parking is full, and I know of people that I play with who couldn't find parking. They had their kid, they just couldn't do it. That is a real consideration. So there's very few moments where I will say, hey, let's fight for every last parking spot. This is coming from Ed France. Let's really look at the parking spots. And actually, Committee Member Blackerby brought up, the resources are primarily closer to the pavilion. And as we move further east with parking spots, that is not as convenient for people. And that's a real issue. I mean, when we're talking about parking, that's one thing. When we're talking about coastal parking, it's a different deal. And that coastal parking is really important. I have serious reservations about option 3 for 2 reasons. One, it's keeping parallel parking, which is the problem. The parallel parking to a U-turn movement was, I believe, what created the fatality with the motorcyclist. We're keeping that. Now, that parallel parker may enter the eastbound vehicular lane at a better angle, which is critical. But they're going to go through the bicycle lane at, again, that very poor angle of visibility. It's also really confusing for trying to introduce reverse angle parking to split it down and then kick down the bulk of the parking further east. And I'm pretty convinced, based on all the great questions and responses, that traffic is going to go faster, and we're going to have more conflicts at the parking due to not changing the configuration of the stop. So for that reason, I think that the problematic implications of the hybrid option actually, to me, make it a non-starter. So I feel compelled to make that case. This is difficult. This is an adjustment. This is not a state highway anymore. The whole point of this project is primarily to reduce speed and to improve angles. This is not like an absolutist thing, right? I mean, the whole brunt of this presentation is not like we are taking this one turn movement off the table or we are making this one like fundamental change. This is how do we reconfigure this to make it more of a human scale street. And, you know, speed kills. If we're slowing down speed movements, there will still be conflicts. There will still be like false starts. There will still be levels of stress for people driving and walking through the intersection with Niños. But the speed's going to be slower. And so I have to speak strongly for option 2.
Can I add a comment to that? To his comment? Okay. Should I ask? Sorry, Catherine.
This is your time to comment.
Okay, great. I recognize the need for parking and coastal access, and I really appreciate that this design. And it's hard for me, difficult for me to say that as well, because obviously parking is a complex issue. But I appreciate Ed's comments about adding more parking here and the need for access. At the same time, I want to really balance that with the aesthetic and the feel of this space. And so with this new design, but specifically with design 2, and it might be helpful if we can put it back on the screen for this.
Which option?
Option 2 with 94 parking spaces. And the always stop. Thank you.
No, I'm sorry. Okay. Close. There.
Thank you. So my concern with adding more parking into this space, specifically, how many existing spaces are there right now?
There's about 58.
58? Okay, I thought it was like around 50. 58 spaces and going to like 94. You're almost doubling the amount of parking there, and it's coastal access, but it's also like like a park space in my mind in our community. Is there a chance to find a sweet spot between, I guess 78 parking spaces is that sweet spot, but I agree with Ed's comments that the parallel parking presents a problem. Is there a way to, could we add trees instead of some of these parking spaces? And I know that sounds somewhat radical, but I really feel like it would green that space. It would be nice for the residents that live there and are going to have this view. If let's say like every 8 parking spaces we planted something. And I know that's probably a question that like you guys might need to think of or talk more about and involves more funding. But I think for the long term, like beauty of the space, it might be worth sacrificing a few spaces to keep it green and keep that corridor feeling more natural.
It's certainly possible. One thing to consider with these alternatives is they're reversible.
Yeah.
So it's just striping.
Totally.
And so if it's not working, we can always put it back.
I just feel like there's...
Even with the always stop going back to a traffic signal, the equipment will still be there. We can turn it back into a signal.
Oh.
Once we start introducing trees, that's more permanent. So one possibility might be if the committee had a preference, if it's successful, which we expect it to be, either alternative 2 or 3, to revisit it in a few years and have that conversation about balancing parking versus trees.
Yeah, Madam Chair and committee members, also remember this is a repayment project. So just echoing what Mr. Bailey is talking about, after we would do this project, I'm confident that someone's going to want to make it a little bit more permanent once we see it succeed, by adding curbs and landscaping, other things that enhance just a restripe project. And that's typical of what would happen, just not at this time.
Okay, great. I guess my concern is like if I don't know if there's like a way, I always have this thing, but like if you could like asterisk this and like footnote like one day far off, like vegetation to be added. And I feel like oftentimes when we discuss parking in this community, there's momentum to move forward with parking and not always to remove parking. And so with an effort to like both make this politically feasible in terms of like not having in order to like make it more realistic, I guess if it's something that could be figured into the design from the beginning, I feel like it might first off make economic sense since we'll be down there doing the work, and then secondly, like I think once we have those spaces in, there will be more of a challenge to remove 6 of them to justify green space, but I'm not sure. So I guess if we made a motion to City Council, I'd ask the TCC members to consider providing maybe an additional motion where we recommend that we can like earmark this project for long-term landscaping improvements or something like that.
Well, I'd like to comment on that. I know maybe it's a little bit out of order, but that whole area is ocean view, so I don't know if anybody would want any additional trees, actually, because they buy the condos so that they can look out at the water, although I'm always in favor of extra trees. And I also would like to emphasize what they are saying, that this is a striping project, and that it'll come to us again if the parallel parking isn't working out. I mean, although it's already been there, but if the parallel parking isn't working out with the new bike lane and the other driving lanes, and if the back angle parking isn't working, that's the point of this, is that if we look at the modified version, there's a real opportunity to see how both work out once the road is restriped for bike lane, and then see if you want to go all back to parallel or add more back end. So this is a process. This is not a final decision.
So I think I can support the motion, but I do like number 2 better. Because of I don't love the change in condition where you're like, oh, parallel, wait, no, something else. I think after the light or the stop, having a new condition, I think it would be nice. I totally understand where the neighborhood is coming from. I'm willing to support 3 because it's just paint, as we say often around here. But what I want to make clear, it's just paint is a double-edged sword, because I want to make sure that we commit to this as a new type of treatment, that if we do it and the council adopts it and the project goes forward, back-end angle parking, a ton of it or a bit of it, as you say, there's initially like a learning curve and compliance or whatever, that we give it enough time to make sure that people, because if something happens, month 1 and this goes in and somebody gets rear-ended while they're doing that, we need to have the ability to be like, not just go, all right, rip it up, put the lanes back, because we know it's not going to. The biggest point that I'm getting out of this project, though we're super focused on the parking, is we're reducing the lanes, and that is the ultimate safety piece of this, is that it's going to reduce speeds, which is the point, right? People are having all these like single vehicle crashes, and like, what's the number one thing that causes single vehicle crashes? Speed. So if I've learned anything from Derek Bailey, it's that. So that to me is the big piece, and that will hopefully take a big bite out of this, get us closer to Vision Zero, hopefully completely zero from day one, but taking the time to get that. And then maybe if it's so wonderful, but there's still an issue with the stoplight and it's letting too many people through and they're going too fast, we can revisit it. So it probably will not be the last time we touch this corridor, but hopefully option C will go quite a ways to helping. And, the bike lane stuff is a big deal. It's a huge deal, especially with the buffering. I like Ms. Stanford's idea of being able to take some of that hashed, painted median towards the intersection and protect the bikes a little more with it. I think that's an elegant solution. So I'm prepared to support the motion, but I'm a little bit partial to the other one. But here we are.
I want to make a comment about longevity, like you said, reviewing. I'm not sure when the new roundabout is going to happen at Las Aves.
Los
Patos.
Patos? Likely in the mid 2020s, like 2023 to 27,
Oh,
somewhere
it's
in that.
way out there.
It's
Okay.
probably at least 5 to 7 years away.
Okay. Well, at that time, I think that it will help the U-turn issue, because that roundabout will, if I was driving and that roundabout, not way over in Montecito, but the roundabout right there was there, I would use it. I'm like you, I'm not real fond of making a U-turn on a busy street. So this is part way there. And that new roundabout will certainly help with the U-turn issue on Cabrillo in the longer view. I just wanted to point that out, because that's a beautiful project that you've presented to us.
That's a roundabout I was referring to in my earlier comments, but I realized, there was that further one that comes up in discussion.
Nope, your light's on. Oh, sorry.
I'd like to speak to Mr. France's considerations, and I agree with Ms. Lackerby that in terms of safety, I think the stop sign is the most likely to slow the traffic down. It basically meters the traffic. But with the addition of the bike lane and the buffered, even where the parallel parking is occurring, there's going to be a buffered space for people making a U-turn, and in your own comments, Mr. Bailey, the amount of back-in parking can be adjusted. So we don't have to, right now it's at Cabrillo. It's right at the end of the development there, yeah. But that could be adjusted a little bit in, closer, or it could be adjusted out further. So there's a with option 3, there's a greater flexibility. We don't get everything, but we get a lot more than we have currently, and we also are being responsive to the questions of the community that live there. Thank you.
Ed?
Real quickly, just to respond to that issue, so the metering of the vehicles is really important for the merging, correct? And the concern that I do have is, while there is flexibility, as Mr. Hodges pointed out, that flexibility is much more limited. And actually, the concern is that some of that merging might bite into the actual bike lane, because people are approaching at speed. They don't hit a stop. They're going 35, 40 miles an hour. And I have to merge, right? A lot of people aren't from around here. And that merge might take up a lot more space. And then, of course, they might approach even further down the road. It's not that far, relatively speaking, if you're at speed. So they might approach somebody who is backing in at more speed. Maybe somebody's backing in, a bicyclist is passing them to the left. So I foresee conflicts. And then again, the parallel parking, this is new for us, right? Like, we have not had Vision Zero conversations like this, and it's super refreshing. I am happy that we are going late into the night to have this conversation, because this community cares. Awesome. The concern that I have about the specificity of our discussion, and why I actually introduced kind of the point of clarification about the U-turns, is the difference between 180 degrees and 110 degrees is those first 70 degrees are the worst ones. And that U-turn that killed the motorcyclist, that person is turning from having 70 degrees of like no visibility through 3 actual lanes of traffic and a 4-lane, 3 or 4 lanes of traffic, whereas we'd be creating only 2 lanes of traffic, and the entirety of the left turn movement, there would be visibility from somebody, who has just, even if they have some neck issues, they still have visibility. So like and both in terms of speed and in terms of visibility, it's the extremes that cause like the dangerous, like potentially fatal issues. And that's what I am really stoked on, the city's approach to mitigate those extremes. I feel like we're like stepping down on our mitigation of those extremes and potentially introducing, there's more potential for extreme speed and or lack of visibility in option 3 versus option 2. The trade-off, which I am certainly sympathetic to, is the ease of crossing especially, but also driving through Los Patos intersection.
Los Niños.
Los Niños, I'm sorry. That said, my perspective is that that trade-off is one primarily of perceived safety versus real, like, potentially fatal situations because of the better reduced speed, including at the intersection, for option 2. So again, I just, I would actually, if I can, prefer that we vote on both option 2 and option 3. I think that option 2 is a superior Vision Zero option. So I would make a motion, if you would hear it, that we... Okay. There's one on the floor. Okay.
We're in discussion.
Okay.
After the vote, I'd be happy to introduce a substitute motion.
Yeah, but can we read that first motion? What, our first motion, please?
To approve option 3.
Okay. So we could have a straight-up vote about that, probably. I think we have a sense of how we feel about it, I think. And then if Mr. Franz wants to make a motion about option 2, that you're certainly welcome to. I wonder if I want to make any more comments. No, I think I just want to say, again, I think that I hear what you're saying, Mr. Franz, and I think that the narrowing of the lanes will make people drive slower, and it remains to be seen with the light or without the light, if with the stop signs they would actually go through slower, or just the narrowing is going to be enough, because we certainly wouldn't want to see accidents come back because we had stop signs and lost that signal light. Accidents with pedestrians. So, it's a tough trade-off. So I just wanted to say that. Okay, should we call the vote? All in favor of the motion on the table, please say.
The motion on the table is
To accept option 3.
Madam Chair, let's do a roll call vote just so it's really clear.
Yeah, the motion is to recommend that this committee is recommending option 3 to the city council.
And when Ms. Jackson reads your name, you're going to say yes or no.
Okay. Committee member Hodges,
Yes.
Black Kirby,
Yes.
France,
No.
Horn,
yes.
Sanford,
Yes.
and Chair Rodriguez.
Yes. The motion passes. At this time, we could entertain a second motion.
Madam Chair, actually, there's no need for a second motion. It clearly passed.
Yes.
So you just recommended to the city council option
3. But I have a committee member who wants to have further discussion.
If I could make a comment then, I might not introduce a substitute motion. So, totally understand. I think these are superior alternatives to our current condition. And I really appreciate the process and all the input that got us here. So this is a victory for the community. Absolutely. I personally feel that there may be conflicts which may arise from this hybrid option. Specifically, obviously, God forbid, potential vehicular bicyclist or vehicular pedestrian or vehicular collision, additionally confusion about the parking. This is the first reverse angle parking. The city of Goleta is pursuing reverse angle parking for Hollister. I don't feel like doing a hybrid is necessarily setting up for success in terms of communicating to the public that has so many messages coming to them. I will probably prepare a comment to council recommending consideration and flexibility for as this hits the ground, the ability to look at changes as needed to address issues that arise. So with that, I am content for this project to move forward.
Okay, I think we are finished with that discussion.
I'd like to make a quick motion. Okay. I don't think of how to say this. Yeah. So I'll just start by saying I think that because this is coastal and because of the two creeks, and I guess I don't know what that most eastern portion is, if it's technically a creek or like an outlet or something. But I think that there's a really good like urban greening, water retention opportunity here. So I'd like to make a motion for our city council or for staff to include some recommendation for incorporating landscaping, considering trees as part of this design in the long term. And someone is welcome to reframe that motion. Oh, should that be a motion? What do you think? Well, I think it'd be a valuable thing for our city council to consider, especially as it is adding quite a bit of, sort of cars to a coastal access point.
Call for a second.
Oh, sorry. Would anyone second that? Oh,
yeah. Would anyone like to second that?
I'm sorry, could you repeat the motion?
I'm making a motion for city council to consider adding long-term landscaping, including and considering trees at the site.
Is there a second?
I'm not going to second it, but I have an idea to hopefully get at the same thing, which is sometimes when we have an idea that doesn't sort of rise to the level of getting the support of a motion, sometimes staff will mention in the presentation to council that this is something that was discussed as possibly a future consideration, so that at least it's spoken in front of them. Is that something that could be added?
Absolutely, Madam Chair, committee members, we can add that, and then also all of you or individually are welcome to come to the city council chambers and express your opinion of the conversation and the public participation that we had today.
Okay, thank you.
All right.
Thank you. And then I'd like to add, potentially individual spaces could be designated free spaces, right? You could open it up. You could sort of poke some holes in the potato, as it were, of the parking.
Well,
Chair Rodriguez, I support the intent of Ms. Sanford's suggestion, and I would add, and I'll add in my comments, but I will say on the record, I think that planters, similar to what we did on Brinkerhoff with the diagonal parking that was installed there, they're movable, so things could be reconfigured, and that could maybe move in that direction. So I'd highly recommend consideration of planters as funds and feasibility allows.
Very good.
Thank you. I really appreciate that.
And then, Madam Chair, before you go on to the next item, just to repeat, if anyone wants to participate at City Council, it will be a next Tuesday's meeting. It is at the back of the agenda, so probably closer to 4 p.m.
Thank you for bringing that up, because I think it would be wise for us to attend. All right, I think we can move on to the West Side and Lower West Side neighborhood traffic planning effort. And thank you for the community members who attended.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I just really appreciate Jessica Grant on our team. She's leading the transportation planning section of our division in Public Works. And we wanted to have her walk through with you our attempts at the West Side and Lower West Side for transportation planning in the future. You might recall we did that for the east side, and I want to give her a chance to tell you about the good things we're going to be doing over the west side.
All right, good evening, Madam Chair and committee members. Jessica Grant. Yes, I'm happy to discuss with you tonight the West Side and Lower West Side's transportation management planning effort we're about to kick off. You're my second group that I'm presenting this item to. Last night I was before the Neighborhood Advisory Council letting them know about this planning effort as well. So, again, it will take place, it's a little bit hard to read on the PowerPoint, but in the west side and lower west neighborhoods of the city. And as Rob mentioned, just like we did in the east side, it's really to look at neighborhood livability with a transportation lens and how we can improve and address pedestrian, bicycle, and traffic safety issues. So what do we do about this planning effort? Well, we have a few objectives. The first is really just to engage the residents using multimedia and communication strategies. Most of our strategies will revolve around two specific workshops, one being a listening workshop, the other being the approach workshop, and also using a survey as well that would come in different forms, electronically and hard copies. And of course, for this communication outreach, it's although the West Side would be notified via our city news and brief, and also via Nextdoor. One of the things that was really helpful when we did the East Side efforts was we had a focus group within the neighborhood, and the focus group was families, and I feel that as far as related to transportation issues, families tend to be maybe the most opinionated bunch, especially the mother and father of how their children and them are deciding to go around the neighborhood, whether it is via vehicle, walking, or biking. And so we plan to make a partnership with the Santa Barbara Unified School District, just as we did in the East Side, and have a lot of outreach materials go to the West Side elementary schools, which in this case is Harding University Partnership, McKinley Elementary, Adams, and although Adams is not in the West Side, there is a good portion of it within the district that is in the West Side. And so although families may not be walking to Adams, they definitely use sidewalks to go to the various bus stops to get to school. And paralleling the effort for the outreach, we also, just as we did in the East Side, is we want to have an independent traffic analysis from our traffic engineering group, and just to see, just like we were just out on the first item for East Cabrillo Strip, is there any patterns of accidents that we should be aware of when we're considering how to address concerns in the neighborhood. And finally, part of this effort too is just again finding out different approaches, and basically this all gets boiled into a plan. I like to show it graphically via pictures, but what we're planning to do, and the first stop is basically the listening workshop. We're planning to do it on April 6th. That's a Saturday, from 10 to noon. And we'll have various topic areas and maps laid out for residents to comment on. In the event that residents cannot make it to the listening workshop, that's where we'll supplement via the survey. And again, we'll push it out via electronic to the community. And then if you are a student of the elementary schools, then you will receive a hard copy survey. And it's slightly more detailed because we have a little map that families can mark up to address their concerns. And in case somebody had more comments from the workshop, they're always welcome to email or also follow up with the survey themselves. And then again, it's the independent city engineering analysis. All of those components then will feed into approaches on how we can address those concerns. And then we'd have an approach workshop that says, okay, this is what we think, that we've listened to you. This is what we think are approaches. Usually it's not a one size fits all. There's lots of tools in the toolbox and to receive feedback on. And this whole process is then summarized in a transportation management plan that discusses the whole effort. Why this is so important, usually in the plan, we'll end up with maybe some just do it options that operationally we might be able to do, paint a high visibility crosswalk, trim a hedge at a street corner, those types of things. But we would also anticipate that there might be larger capital projects. Just like the East Side effort, most of the funding is that we would seek. It would have to be grant funding. We could use some of our funds for leveraging, but a lot of the streets capital funds, as you know, when I brought the streets capital program back in November, a lot of it is fed for just maintenance of existing infrastructure. So to introduce anything new, we really depend on those grant sources. How we score very high in grant applications is having a robust community outreach process. And so this is all the pieces that we need when we go out and do this effort. This is just a quick graphic, not really readable from here, but it's, again, as far as our stakeholders, it's the elementary schools, the residents. We also would want, hopefully, merchants as well from the business corridors in the west side attending. If there's any adjacent neighborhoods that are interested in how it impacts them as they go through maybe the west side neighborhood to adjacent neighborhoods. And then we hope to have continual partnership with our nonprofits, with Santa Barbara Bike Coalition and Coast, to help put the word out as well, and hopefully make use of their listservs to have additional participation through the workshop and survey. And again, I'll discuss sort of the process, what this means. Using my cursor, if there's all the light blue is the Traffic Circulation Committee, so this is where we're at tonight. In the green is where we'll have our first workshop. And then I'll return back to the transportation circulation to just give you updates along the way to let you know what we heard. And the purple squares represent the Neighborhood Advisory Council, because they're another important committee during this very important process. And then again, we would return to hopefully do an approach workshop on June 1st. A lot of this outreach, again, we're going through the schools. I'm trying to make use of the rest of the school calendar before school gets out. If for some reason we hear during the listening workshop and the surveys that there is a lot more that staff needs to evaluate before we return with approaches, then we might push the approach workshop into the fall. But ideally, we would like to have a plan before you in draft sometime in the early fall, September, October, and then going to City Council by the end of the year. So again, it's just like the East Side effort. It's a very tight timeline, but I think what was successful with the East Side was having, when you think of timelines or planning efforts, sometimes it is better to do it quicker than have things go on for years and years. So again, we for the East Side effort, it was a very successful process where we were able to do a lot of just do it items, and then in addition, where we had millions of infrastructure needs, and I'm happy to report within 5 years of the plan, we had all of the infrastructure funded. And so it was very exciting. It was maybe just a good timing issue, but it's fun as a planner to not see a plan shelved and that it was quickly implemented. So we hope to hopefully continue that success in the West Side neighborhood. It's my presentation.
Thank
Happy
you
to
very
answer
much.
any questions.
Yeah, I do have questions. I have some questions, but if anyone would like to go ahead of me. Will you be able to provide this in Spanish and English?
Yes, Madam Chair. Yes, we are planning, and I apologize, it was an oversight, but yes, all of this communication effort will be a bilingual effort, and anything that I push in the schools, it is mandatory for it to be in English and Spanish. And then at the workshop, we will also have tables available for Spanish as well as English.
And I may have missed it, I apologize, but the initial communication to the residents, is there going to be a letter to mail to everybody, or are you doing
Right.
all the schools have websites now.
Right.
It's amazing.
Yes, so it's going to be coming soon. I'm just, the part of the process for the schools is they have a kind of like a city that they have a public information officer. So I need to just continue with the clearances. So I've submitted them the workshop flyer and just waiting on approval. I'm hoping to have approval by tomorrow so I can start to push out the flyer towards the end of next week. That would hit the school's Thursday folders, and so that would be 2 weeks in advance. And then again, I hope to use our other city news and brief and Nextdoor to push out the flyer, and hopefully with our other nonprofit partners that they can push the flyer out as well.
So you won't be doing a full blanket residential mailer?
No.
Well, I don't have an opinion about it. I was just curious whether you'd be able to do that. Okay, thank you.
We do. I forget the numbers, but I believe in Nextdoor, I think there was about 2,400 subscribers to Nextdoor just in the West Side alone.
Mr. Fran?
Jared Rodriguez, quick question. Thank you, Jessica, for the presentation. How might the ATP projects? Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah.
How might the ATP projects in the West Side and design and any remaining public process overlap with this?
Yes. So, like I said, that for the ATP grants and why we've been so successful. We're actually per capita, the most successful grant award recipients in the state. And I think part of it is because one of the sections of the grant does deal with community outreach. And so it's a very necessary component.
Absolutely. And
Did I understand that question?
If I can stop you there, I actually intended it differently. I meant specifically the already funded ATP projects. But if I could use that as a moment to just reflect the appreciation that I hope that we all have for the diligence that city staff and the process you all have taken And I actually could easily foresee some of the work that you all are doing, for example, close to La Cumbre Junior High, strengthening potential future proposals through this process. I think you're on it, and I would love to see TTAC receive a presentation from the city of Santa Barbara, because a lot of cities have a lot of misconceptions about why the city of Santa Barbara does so well, and they would do well to receive a presentation about our public process. Just yesterday, I was having a conversation about the complete lack of understanding about the value of public process in receiving some of these state funds. And you all literally, I mean, you set the bar. So we could use some of your knowledge in some other jurisdictions. So thank you for mentioning that.
Yes.
But specifically,
Yes, I know.
The West Side Bike Boulevards.
So yes, thank you, Committee Member France. What we plan to do at the workshop is to again have different topic areas, bicycling as being one of them. What we plan to do on the map is to show existing bike infrastructure, and we do plan to show future infrastructure that's in design. And while we will not go through the details because we're still working out all of the design for the project, we will definitely show the route where residents will see coming soon that there will be a bicycle boulevard. Also, so that will be another additional component to the workshop. I believe I have a sentence that says, come see, learn about existing projects in design. And the other one is a project that's a crossing improvement and safety. It's another safety project at Carrillo and San Andres. I don't know, it has a very long name to it, but it's, again, to shorten the crossing distance for pedestrians at that very important and well-traveled intersection. It also has a big lighting component, and we will be showing on the various maps where the new lighting is going to be going in, and as well as I think on the pedestrian crossing, we will show where the new access ramps would be located in crossing area. Yes, and then again on the other map is the bike boulevards that would be shown as well. We'd probably have another specific workshop maybe for a design update on the bike boulevards where we would get just to let the residents know. But we decided we wanted to kind of have a big picture meeting with the West Side first before going into the details of some of the existing capital projects.
Thank you.
And Mr. France, I did talk to TTAC. It was agendized a couple months ago, but I did do a debriefing about the ATP grants from the City of Santa Barbara perspective, so how our regional partners could provide stronger grant applications as well.
Thank you. I'll have to look that up and reference it. Appreciate it.
Susan Horn has a question, I believe, or comment.
I don't see on this flow chart where the survey is, and I just wondered, am I missing it?
It's not on there. Yes, what we plan to do is the week following the workshop is to push out the survey.
And
residents ideally would have a month to comment on the survey.
Okay, I'm remembering that when I was working with La Cumbre Junior High for about 6 years, I was helping to coordinate the Safe Walk to School, Walk to School Day. And part of that was the survey of the students. And one of the questions was, is there a place that feels dangerous for you, on the way to school? And that's one of the questions when we got a bunch of answers about walkway right there at Modoc and Portezuelo being, super long and on, really a bad intersection and everything. And there were 3 projects over 6 years that got grant money and, completely transformed that intersection. But that was based on what the students answered. So I don't know if you have that survey. I mean, I can certainly give it to you, but it's, it's Safe Routes to School. I'm sure it's still on their website. But anyway, I just want to recommend that you include the students in some way, if possible. And also the principals and the staff in the office. They hear a lot of stuff that never goes very far, away from their little group. But that would be fantastic information if you could interview them or make sure they get the survey or whatever.
Thank you, Committee Member Horn. Yes, I do have that survey, and we have used it in prior grant applications. Yes, and I mentioned the elementary schools, but we also plan to outreach to the Coombra Junior High as well, and that we would be pushing mainly materials out electronically, so they would be receiving the survey electronically and then the workshop flyers electronically. On the flyer itself, it does say families welcome, and so we do encourage all ages and to attend the workshop, but always as a supplement, we definitely value those school hazard assessments, and COAST is our partner for facilitating school hazard assessments, and so we work with them closely, and so if we feel from the workshop and surveys, if we feel that we're missing a student voice, that I can definitely see we can push that out in tandem as well to get additional feedback.
Ms. Blackerby?
So assuming, since there's no public comment, I can go into comments. Is that acceptable? Okay, cool. So one thing on the schools, this is awesome. I love it. I love the East Side one. I somewhere still have my little map and crayon packet. So hopefully crayons are involved this time. But the one thing that's sort of, you said Adams School there's kind of a catchment in the area, but it's not inside this zone. I would say, they don't need Thursday folders, but San Marcos High School also, kids from the west side go to San Marcos High School, and then they do, though they're probably not biking or walking to San Marcos High School from the west side, they certainly come home in the afternoon and on the weekends. And I remember seeing some statistics of people who've been injured as pedestrians or cyclists on the west side, and their ages they're teenagers essentially, or people in their early 20s. So I think it's a really vulnerable community that even though they're not walking to and from school on the west side, that's a big deal. So I don't know if you can tack that on to your Santa Barbara Unified at least electronic outreach to those parents, because some of them, their only kids might be in high school at this point at San Marcos. And then another thing, in addition to the study that Ms. Horn brought up, last year, Coast, in concert with California Walks and Safe Trek from UC Berkeley, did a study which was a comprehensive walk around the neighborhood and assess a bunch of different hazards for pedestrians, mostly pedestrians, but also bicyclists, which is really great, and just talked it out to people of these are all the problem areas with lighting, with sidewalk uplift, the spectacular trees on the west side. And it's just a zoo on the sidewalk as far as uplift. And actually blocking out streetlights because the tree canopy is so spectacular. So, especially on San Andreas. So that is in report form, and it would be, I think, great to look at and follow up with the people who are involved in that. I think it's a great project. I know, I believe in what you said about having a pretty quick timeline on planning and then executing it is absolutely right. And to, go back to why why that happened, because there was a lesson learned, right? Now at this point, kind of a long time ago, over a decade ago, that there were projects planned in the Upper East Side, and there's a really slow, long planning process, and approaches and a project were decided on, and then a ton of time went by. People moved, people forgot about it. They went in and people flipped out, right? All the traffic calming up there. And yada, yada, people were elected to city council. It was a whole thing that changed the direction of the city for many years. And so we learned our lesson there, did the East Side thing the right way, and now continuing it through. So I agree, moving quickly, and now thankfully we have Measure C and are incredible getting grant funds. So keep it going. I think that, we'll be able to move even faster than we did on the East Side, because we had to go kind of piece that together with some, I think, CDBG funds and things like that. So I'm really excited. Hope to get to the workshop. I live just on the other side of the map area, so I'd love to attend. But I think it's great, and working with the schools is huge, because you get that really good input of people who are going to and from, no matter what way they're going to and from, even in their cars. I think it's huge. So thank you very much.
Have we moved to comments, or are there more questions left? Okay, it seems like comments are great. I just want to say this project is awesome, and it's one of the things that makes me proud to live in Santa Barbara is our attention and your skill at projects like these. So I love it. I'm 100% in support. I like everything that's been outlined around the outreach process. Working with the school district seems great. Bringing in San Marcos if possible. The only thing I would add is that, and I don't know if this already factored in, but if we're doing digital mailings, I'd love to see outreach to the Boys and Girls Club, and then maybe Girls Inc., just because I know from my small, brief interactions with both organizations that they have a lot of their students come from the West Side. And I just have to say also that I'm sure the Neighborhood Advisory Council was very excited for this, because I've been on that council, and I know that so many of a lot of the discussion that comes up, especially there's a lot of members from the West Side, is basic traffic challenges with crossings, with timings, with sidewalk quality, and it's always really interesting to see how much that plays into their day-to-day quality of life. So with that, I think this is great. Thank you.
Are there any other comments, questions? Well, this has been a long meeting, but it's been very fruitful. And I want to thank everyone for your participation, and look forward to hopefully as many of us as possible being at City Council for the important discussion next week. So, and welcome to your first meeting, Eve.
Yeah. Technically not my first TCC meeting, but my first
on this side.
On this side of the table.
On this side of this very nice table.
Yeah, I neglected to do that at the beginning. So, Well, I think we can adjourn. Thank you very much.
Thank you.